Welcome to The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys. In each episode, Elijah will have a conversation with other professionals to discuss how their fields relate to trust and estate planning. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, keyslawgroup.com. Now here's the host of The Keys to Your Legacy, Elijah Keys.
Hi, thank you everyone for tuning in to the Keys to Your Legacy podcast. I am Elijah Keys, an estate planning attorney. Here we discuss trust and estates issues, as well as things that are related to those. And today we are very privileged to talk to Lueddemann. I know it says Leopold, but he goes by Lee, at least I think so, who is a privacy, data, and IP attorney. How are you doing today, Lee?
Great. Thanks, Elijah. And yes, my friends call me Lee, but my name is Leopold.
All right. So a lot of listeners might be thinking, what in the world is a privacy attorney? What is it that you do?
So the easiest way to think of privacy is the data that everybody owns. As you own a car or a house or the things in your house, you also own information about you. Not just your phone number, your social security number, but other informations, things you like, what religion you are, whether you belong to trade groups, all sorts of things. And so that is your data. It belongs to you, not anybody else. And then you can decide what people do with that data, what they can't do. And in that, you have a right to privacy over the data you own. And this is worldwide. Different states have different laws, different countries have different laws. And we even have many laws according to, and I'm sure everybody's heard of HIPAA. That's a data privacy law that started in 1997 and it's been around for quite some time. And that, in a nutshell, is basically what data privacy is. That's different than data security, which might be the firewalls or protections that you have to keep the data secure and retain your data privacy.
I see.
So they're interlinked, but they're not the same.
So you're talking about HIPAA, which is the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, that restricts certain professionals that have your confidential medical information. They can't release it without prior authorization or some exception. Is that right?
Yeah, that's one aspect of it. Yeah, they don't. It's yours to retain, and they have to protect it in certain ways to make sure it doesn't get released.
Well, it's interesting because I remember seeing that there was a data leak recently, a very large one from the US government, where a whole bunch of people's social security numbers got leaked. I understand that's an IT issue. I get it. But once that data is out there, it's in the public domain. Is that where you get involved, or do you generally get involved before that?
Well, I'm not going to get involved with the federal government breach, but yes, data breaches are common, and I'm sure most people have heard now it's not a matter of if, but a matter of when. Things go wrong all the time, and really what I help my clients is, one, to make sure that they have the proper protections in place. We mentioned HIPAA, there's protections you need for that, but there's all kinds of laws, depending on what state, depending on the topic, and even depending on what country or the European Union. So they reduce their liability, and like I just said, basically when it gets breached. So we can shut it down quickly, we can mitigate damages, reduce how much information they can get, and stop the liability. So it helps my clients and also helps my clients' clients.
Yeah. So when you're saying liability, it sounds like you generally don't represent members of the public, you represent businesses who might serve members of the public. Is that fair?
That's correct. Most of my clients are business.
Okay. See, we have all opposite things because most of my clients are individuals, and so that's okay. That's good. So my firm satisfies all these rules, right? But we just go through third-party vendors who have all these privacy laws in place. And so we use vendors for confidential like bank accounts and social security numbers that we need to have at times, but we have privacy protections and we have data protections, and so all these things. It's very interesting. You mentioned that you're an IP attorney as well. IP meaning intellectual property. I looked at your resume and it's very deep. You do a lot of stuff. You've been doing this for a long time.
I have been a number of decades. So if I may go back real quick, privacy and HIPAA does relate to your clients in that early on I mentioned it is their data.
Yeah.
And so they get to control how people use it. And
Mhm.
in doing so, if they take an interest in that, they can also help make sure that whoever is holding their data holds it correctly or ask or request that it be done or look around. So they can make sure that, well, as much as they can, find safe businesses that will hold their data and respect their data and maybe therefore reduce the risk of their data being leaked onto, say, the dark web.
Right.
Sorry to go backwards a little bit, but I thought that does relate to the individuals, even though my
That's
clients are businesses.
right.
This is a cooperative thing between the individuals and the businesses.
Right.
Regarding IP, yes, I've been doing it for a while. And that intellectual property, in terms of my practice, I'm a registered patent attorney. So I do prosecute patents, trademarks, and copyrights, especially now as relates to artificial intelligence with data privacy. So that's one crossover I have between data privacy and intellectual property, which makes me unique.
Oh, interesting. Well, I just want to let our clients know, our vendors know, that we satisfy the highest level of security at my firm because I recognize the issue that Lee has stated. I'm very aware of it. We're very aware. And so we satisfy a new law that's been around for about a year from the FCC or FTC, I don't remember which one it is, but called the Safeguards Rule, which requires you to satisfy certain data leaks or prevent them. It's mainly an IT issue, but it's a big deal. So we satisfy that. I know how important that is. Lee, there's one thing that I wanted to ask you about. We've talked very briefly, and I said that you don't know a huge amount about it presently, like it's not something that you've dealt with for a long time. You mentioned some experience with the blockchain, and I just wanted to ask you a few questions about that if you could, because a lot of clients are asking for things from the blockchain, although they don't really understand it.
Absolutely.
Okay. So a lot of people have heard of cryptocurrency, and I'm sure that many of my clients know what it is, but can you help explain conceptually what that is?
So, in from a very high level, it is the ownership or the right of ownership. And like anything, the more something is in demand, the more it's worth. If ownership of, say, a limited number of things, here we have a limited number of, say, Bitcoin, there's a scarcity involved. If you own a Bitcoin, the more people that want it, the more it's going to be worth. Now, another thing about not just is it a Bitcoin or a Dogecoin or any of these other cryptocurrencies, and there's lots of them, but a key to cryptocurrency is, as you mentioned already, the blockchain. And that is, in its very basic sense, a distributed ledger. So it's not just a ledger or a historical record kept in one place, but it's kept across a whole network of computers that will store the data and record it and record the transfers back and forth and who owns what.
Okay.
And so that in from a very high level is the idea behind cryptocurrency and blockchain.
Okay. One thing about blockchain that I thought was interesting is that the ledger, correct me if I'm wrong, but the ledger, which is distributed, it's on a million computers across the world. So people can't really fake the fact that they have it. It's publicly accessible. So it's easy to double check whether the ledger is correct or incorrect on your computer. So you can't fake that you own something. But let me make sure that I understand correctly, because I've heard this, but I don't know if it's true, that the blockchain or the ledger that you've talked about, this public record on other people's computers, is not a record of ownership. It is a record of a transfer. Is that correct? Is that right?
Yeah, it shows where it was transferred to or from. So you can
So
trace down.
now the problem that I have some of my clients talk about, and we'll discuss this briefly, if we've gone beyond your expertise, because I know you're a lawyer, you're not a financial advisor, you're not a tech guy, I totally get that. Okay. I don't want to put you out by asking a question that's beyond. But it's interesting to me that a lot of clients own it. But the problem that I see with them, with the ownership of something which is on the blockchain, either an NFT, which is a non fungible token, or a cryptocurrency, is that anybody who has the key and the wallet can simply transfer the money. And what kind of controls do they have? And I'm wondering if that's something that you have experience with. If you don't, totally fine. But let me give you a situation. And if this is beyond, that's totally okay. Situation is that I have lots of clients that have cryptocurrency, and they're trying to transfer that property to someone else when they die. But when they die, there's an intermediary, a trustee or an agent that has possession of that key. And the key equates to ownership. There's certainly laws in California that would prevent a trustee from stealing. But if they're not a very nice person, what prevents them from taking the money?
I guess it would be the same idea that you don't commit crimes. So what permits anybody from committing a crime, right? I
That's
mean,
true.
if the trustee is going to steal cryptocurrency or steal heirloom jewelry or steal anything else from that matter, I suppose if they really want to, even though they're not supposed to, they can.
Yep.
I mean, that to me is my knee-jerk reaction of what can prevent them from doing so. If they have the means to take it, whether it's cryptocurrency or a diamond necklace, if they really
Right.
want to, I suppose they can take it, even though it's not right and they shouldn't do
Yeah.
it. I don't know if
Yeah.
that answers your question sufficiently or
That's
not.
a
Maybe
fair
both.
statement. It's a fair statement. In the United States, there are certainly laws that prevent people from stealing property. And I know that cryptocurrencies can be more easily tracked. I don't want to get too far down this road, but that's very interesting. Now, I've noticed here that a lot of your work that you're listed as a data privacy and intellectual property attorney. Do you do any litigation, or is it only transactional and advice?
I don't litigate anymore. I have litigated in the past.
I used to litigate. I don't anymore either. I think it's a smarter path, frankly.
Less
Because
stressful sometimes.
whenever I litigated, I would be up at 3 a.m. pacing the halls, and my wife said that I can't do that anymore. So that's done. Yeah. Now, I remember when we spoke, we met at a networking event, and you split your time, I think, where you live in Idaho. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah. What made you move back to Idaho? Why do you like it so much?
It was when my youngest graduated high school, we wanted to downsize. So we downsized into Idaho, and my in-laws all live here. So we moved closer to family. I have relatives here as well, and it's a little bit slower pace of life. And because I work remote, I've been working remote since 2012. It really, I guess theoretically, I live on a different continent for that matter. I've
Just
worked
as
through
long,
every continent. I'm
yeah,
sorry? Go ahead.
just as long as you can contact your clients, it doesn't matter, right?
That's right. There's very few, when I did have an office, when I first started this legal practice, very few people would ever actually even come in the door because most of what I deal with is technology and science-based companies. Most of them want to email or text, etc.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Have you found? I mean, do you work from your home? Are you at home right now, or do you have an office in Idaho?
I work from home. This is my home office.
It's a long commute. I've always found that working from home was really hard for me because I get so distracted. There's always something to do at the house. Of course, I have small children and I have pets, and so for an empty nester, maybe that's ideal. For me, I don't know. I have kids hanging on me at all times, and it's just no joy.
You know, I actually get more distracted in an office. The firms I've been to and of the firms I'm associated with now, when I go into the office, I feel like I'm basically doing what I'm at home. But then I always have people popping in my office saying hello or talking about things where when I'm here, I shut the door and I'm very isolated. So I don't get very distracted. And the commute to the lunch is my kitchen. So
Yep.
all very
Yeah.
short commutes. I feel like saves me time.
Yeah. Now, do you generally have the same list of clients that you serve for years and years, or is it a lot of different transactions?
Both. I have some clients I've been serving for well over a decade, and other ones come through with a few patents or a few trademarks or a startup AI company that needs a lot of regulations and documents drafted. And
Right.
once I do that for them, then they're on their way.
On their way. Yeah. That happens a lot in my business where there's some clients that keep coming back because they have a lot of family issues. but then a lot of transactions where people come in and then they go, they don't need my help anymore, and that's fine with me. I remember talking to a woman this morning who called, and she was surprised that attorneys specialized in different areas. She just thought a lawyer was a lawyer. And I had to explain to her that there's this concept that says that you can do 10,000 things once and do them kind of poorly, or you can do one thing 10,000 times and really do it well. And so it's nice to see that you're a master of your craft.
I totally subscribe to that point of view. And I would have never guessed that either before I became an attorney.
Yeah. But you've been around the block for quite a while. I mean, you got your degree at Chapman University, right, in Southern California?
That's right.
Yeah. And since then, I'm just looking at all of your different listings here. It says that you were a professor at Lincoln Law School in San Jose. What was that like?
That was enjoyable. I taught data privacy, and in that there's a certification process, and I'm certified in that. And so it was an upper division 1-unit class. And my goal, and I got permission from the law school, was to teach my law students according to, assumedly, not just understanding the material, but also getting them ready to pass this exam, which I thought is something that I really appreciated when I would come across a professor, whether it was in undergraduate, graduate, or law school, that would teach me real world applicability instead of theory.
Of course.
And that's really what I wanted to impart to the law students, because I thought this will help them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of law school, a big misconception by a lot of people. They think that law school trains people to be lawyers, and they don't. Law school is there to teach you to pass the bar, and that's it. And then after that, then you take your theoretical knowledge and you start to learn to apply it. I remember getting my first job out of law school, my first full-time job. I was part-time here and there, but first full-time job. And they said, he's a baby. And I said, but I passed the bar. And they said, yeah, you're a baby. You don't know what you're doing. Yeah, it took me 2 years of self-denial to actually understand that I didn't know what I was doing.
I agree. It helps you to recognize, spot an issue. Oh, there's one. There's a legal issue. There's a legal issue. And that's about it. Yeah. And then that's why you get like that woman you talked about earlier, the specialization to, once you spot the issue, now what do you do with it? And that's where your experience and specialization comes in, as to what you do with it, how you handle it, risk analysis, on and on and on, being a lawyer or an attorney.
Exactly. Well, something that's interesting to me is that I work in an area where there's a lot of engineers and a lot of scientists, and they oftentimes have patents associated. It's not necessarily creative, but it's definitely scientific in ownership. And my question to you is, if someone works for a big company and has a patent assigned to them, who owns that? Is that owned by the company, or is that owned by the person, or is it up in the air?
So the key word there is assigned. If somebody works for a big company, they invent something. Now, clearly, they will always be the inventor. But if they assign it to their employer, which is generally the case, even though they're the inventor, the employer owns the rights to use it, market it, not use it if they want.
Right.
So that the employer is generally the owner, and the same would be for a copyright or a trademark.
Okay. It reminds me of a case where I represented a scientist who had worked for the Xerox company. Xerox went down quite a bit recently, but back in the day, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, it was pushing the frontier of data, of material science, and a lot of things. And so he was a chemical engineer, a scientist with a PhD, and he had 15 patents in his name, and we had to go chase down each and every one, and they had all been assigned. Every single one had been assigned, and that's okay. It's just part of the process. When you represent an engineer or a scientist and they pass away, you have to basically just go look.
Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
Although there is a rare instance where somebody invents something that has nothing to do with their employer, and then they own it, not the employer. So if it's done with company time, company utilities, company things, then the company should probably own it.
Sure. But you're talking about like someone working and burning the midnight oil in the garage, experimenting and developing something, or writing code or doing something, but on their spare time, not related to the company on their own hours using their own facilities and their own materials.
That's right. Your engineer that's writing computer code or computer scientist for a big company and then figures out one weekend mowing the lawn, hey, it would really be a good idea and useful if my lawnmower did this. Has nothing to do with writing computer code that probably should not be assigned to the company. He was mowing the lawn on the weekend, even though he's employed by another company.
So if I hear correctly, it sounds like there's even entire categories of work that if someone works, for example, if someone's an employee of Cisco and they're an engineer, that if they're developing something at home that is related to what they're doing at work, that might be surrendered to Cisco as well.
It gets messier, especially if they are maybe a little careless and decide to do it on their Cisco laptop, even though it's not part of their work. Or maybe they do back and forth between people to build a prototype using their Cisco email, even though
Yeah.
it wasn't part of their assignment or their employment at Cisco. So it technically should be theirs, but sounds like it's starting to get expensive and maybe messy. And I'd hate to risk somebody's employment for something that was just careless. But yeah, you're right, technically, but it can get messy.
Risky in the legal world means expensive because and expensive doesn't mean that right or wrong. Expensive in my field means there's uncertainty. Whenever there's uncertainty means that there's holes or openings that people can have differing opinions. Differing opinions means now we get to argue about what's right and wrong, not about what is.
Especially if there's some money to be made behind
Yep.
the opinion.
Yep. And what we're both talking about here is we're talking about two different applications of contract, where you have an employer's contract, a contract for assignment of certain intellectual property rights. And in my case, I'm talking about a trust contract, but both of those deal with transfers of things that are worth a great deal of value, right? I mean, a patent could be worth a huge amount of money, as could the money in a trust. And so for anybody who's listening, if you want to avoid complication now and in the future, get certainty on what the contract says. And if you're not sure, go see somebody.
The clients who really understand what I do, I've had one or multiple actually tell me they see me as an insurance policy.
Yep.
So help us steer down the right path. It'll cost me a little money up front, just like an insurance policy. But if something goes wrong, or hopefully we can avoid it. And if it does, now we're forearmed and forewarned, and it'll cost a lot less in the long run because we have all of our ducks in a row.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what I explain to clients as well. A trust attorney is very similar to insurance policy. And what you don't want to do is when you're no longer in control, you don't want to abandon that control to somebody else. You want to make sure that you can control it as much as you can, just to avoid complication. Uncertainty, complication, holes. If there's an opportunity for someone who has a selfish motivation, they totally will, right? They totally will. They'll just be rude.
Everybody knows a horror story of families that descend on vultures when somebody passes and try and gobble up the estate and cause all kinds of problems. And it just gets ugly. And if the more we can avoid something like that, whether it's in business or estate planning, I think the better off everybody is, except for maybe the litigators. Sorry, my friends who are litigators.
Yeah, the litigators will never have an ending of money. The problems of people wanting to throw something over on each other will always exist. But I think it's your and my job to actually avoid the litigators. And then if we can't avoid it, send it out to somebody who will fight. I got a subpoena last week, the week before, where I had represented a family where it was a woman who was divorcing, and I prepared an estate plan for her, and we couldn't fund it because of certain legal complications. But now the family is still fighting, even after she died. They're still fighting. And now they subpoenaed me, meaning that they asked for production of all the documents in my possession. Sure, I'll give them more. Feel free. And we'll see how far they argue. I don't know. We'll
It's
see.
so sad. Makes me sad what
Yeah.
happens to families over things like money. But anyway.
I view my job as trying to save family relationships. That's really my job at the core. Money's going to go where it's going to go, and I'm going to write things down, and I'm going to try to defend people's right to make their decisions. But my job, I believe, is to maintain someone's autonomy, their rights, their right to make their own decisions, and then keep the family together if I can at all. Sometimes I can't. It's kind of sad.
Well,
But I think I've saved a lot more than I've lost. So that makes me feel really good. I sleep great at night. Yeah.
good for you.
Well, Lee, it's really good to talk to you today. Thank you so much for coming on. If somebody wants to find you, how do they find you online?
So my primary law firm, Law Office of Leopold Lueddemann. I'm a solo practitioner, and I have a feeling if you type in Leopold Lueddemann attorney, I am pretty sure I'm the only one who will pop up for I don't know how many listings down Google or Yahoo or whatever you do. So if you can spell my name, I shouldn't be that hard to find.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you're right. So this podcast will be transcribed and people will be able to watch it. Do you have any final questions before we close up today? Any questions, any comments?
No questions, but one thing you didn't mention, or I'm sorry, one thing that you did mention that I just want to remind people, whether it's in your practice of estate planning and tax or my practice of intellectual property and data privacy, if you have a question or you may get, like we tell little kids, that icky feeling of it's not feeling right, maybe find a trusted attorney and ask them a real quick opinion as to whether it's worth taking a stronger look at or not. As they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And in this case, we're talking potentially headache and saving a lot of money. And so I want to remind, because that's one thing we did bring up. And I'm always happy when clients come to me ahead of time before a problem arises than after the problem is there.
I agree with that completely. Ask a lawyer because you don't know what you don't know. And the best lawyers, Lee's a very good one. The best lawyers are going to make it sound simple because they'll get right to the point. But most of the answers from the lawyers are, it depends. The reason why it depends is because the law has a set standard. And if we want to deviate from it, we have to find an exception. And then sometimes there's an exception to the exception. So if you're looking at a trust is an exception to a general rule. So a lot of people say trusts are easy. They're not. I wish they were. They're not. You're trying to deviate from a whole bunch of stuff. And I'm sure that Lee can talk to you at length about his stuff. But yeah. So to close up here, I want to thank everyone for listening who's made it this far. This has been the Keys to Your Legacy podcast. Please follow us on Spotify or wherever else you can find podcasts. And go ahead and leave us a comment below about something that you'd like us to talk about or something that was interesting today. Thank you so much. I'm Elijah Keys, and we'll talk to you next time.
You've been tuning into The Keys to Your Legacy with your host, Elijah Keys. You can find this show on all the major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, keyslawgroup.com. Thank you for your positive reviews, comments, questions, and for sharing this show with others.